with Fabricio of the Latinx-Thriving Initiative Steering Committee. I want to thank our deans and chairs and the divisions who are going to be laterally engaging in this effort. This is absolutely a campus effort that's going to require all of us. I want to thank the Office of Planning and Analysis for their continued support to surface the data in these efforts and bring equity to that data. I also want to thank all of you, our audience, for joining, including Dr. Gina Garcia. I want to thank Mitzi Iñiguez for stepping in to make the Zoom magic happen at the last minute today. I really appreciate it, Mitzi. And I want to thank our event organizers, Marta Chavez, Silvia Marquez, and Fabricio Mejia, as well as our students and alumni that I'm so excited for you to hear from later today. As we move on a little bit to our next slide, I wanted to start with our land acknowledgement. The Division of Equity and Inclusion acknowledges that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community, inclusion, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. As members of the Berkeley community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities today. This acknowledgement was co-created with Muwekma Ohlone Tribe and Native American Student Development and is a living document. And for more information, you'll see the link right there, which you can visit at your own leisure, and being really intentional about becoming a Latinx thriving institution deeply connected to our connection to the land and its communities as well. On the next slide, we want to make sure we stay on schedule today. So we're going to put the acuerdos comunitarios, or the community agreements, in the chat. Feel free to add anything that we may be missing, but as you can see, we have some here about sharing the air, using I statements, listening to understand and listen deeply, demonstrating and receiving respect, and being open to the outcome. Now I'm going to turn it over to our amazing co-chair of the initiative, Dr. Chris Gutierrez, who will introduce herself.
Buenas tardes. I'm Chris Gutierrez. I'm a faculty member in the Graduate School of Education. Specifically, I hold the Carol Liu Chair and I'm Associate Dean. But it's been my honor for the past 2 years to serve as co-chair of this wonderful initiative. I'm so grateful for all of you coming. Back to you, Dania.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gutierrez. It's so great to co-lead with you. And thank you for your work on so much of this, even before this with the task force, and just being an amazing part of our institution. I really appreciate it. So before I get to the updates, I wanted to share that as we are moving further into the agenda, we're going to be turning off the chat so that you can focus on the updates as well as the video and the panels, but you'll still be able to message us as the hosts and co-hosts of this meeting. And so today we're going to talk about Chancellor Chris's message. We have a video for you, share some updates with you since the fall 2021 town hall. And then we're going to have panel discussions, if you think about it as sort of past, present, future, and where we are now, as well as the next steps in closing. Next slide. Before we get to the Chancellor's video, Mitzi, sorry, pause it for a second. Oh, I did want to share that the topics and themes and our intentionality in our town hall is really co-creating this initiative with all of you. So the way we've shaped it has really been the community feedback. We're also going to make sure that we include answers to the pre-submitted questions and any questions that were unanswered from the previous town hall on our website, hsi.berkeley.edu. So really wanted to thank you for all of that and know that we are being intentional and being responsive and co-creating this with all of you. So if you don't see your question answered today, it is forthcoming. Check out the website, send us a nudge. We also created the questions for our panelists based on your feedback. And some of them were the pre-submitted questions, as well as what we've heard as we're listening and engaging with this work. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chancellor Chris.
afternoon. I'm so pleased to welcome you to the Spring Latinx-Thriving Virtual Town Hall, the latest in a series of regular campus-wide engagements as we co-create this effort that's so important to me and to our campus community. I'm excited to share some updates since our last town hall that we held at the end of 2021. We've made good progress towards our goal of becoming a Latinx-Thriving institution and gaining federal designation as a Hispanic serving institution by 2027. To meet our objectives in the fullest possible sense, we must go beyond the numerical representation required by the federal government and focus on building a thriving framework that ensures that every student and our staff and faculty can thrive with equal access to the full range of Berkeley's extraordinary opportunities. Vice Chancellor Dania Matos and her team are working hard to develop a collaborative campus-wide implementation plan that will focus on several foundational elements, including support for academic excellence, community, belonging, and transformation of our institutional practices. To truly thrive, we must affirm, value, and uplift Latinx ways of knowing, Latinx lived experiences, and the diverse intersectional identities throughout the various aspects of campus life. I believe that these efforts will benefit every member of our campus community, since the spaces, systems, support networks, and policies that will make us a Latinx thriving campus will help strengthen the foundation that serves us all. Just ahead, you'll be hearing more about this important work now underway, including detailed information about the Latinx Thriving Steering Committee Vice Chancellor Matos' team has launched. My office is providing critical staff support to this initiative. I'm thrilled that Martha Chavez from my office is partnering with Sylvia Marquez, HSI Implementation Manager, to support the initiative. The Latinx Thriving team is also now engaging with key campus partners in research, fundraising, admissions, graduate studies, and other important departments on campus, so we can together harness all that this university has to offer. As outlined in our campus strategic plan, achieving HSI designation is a critical goal for our campus. This is a bold step, but it's just the beginning, and we will need your support, ideas, and energy on our journey toward becoming a Latinx thriving institution. I hope you all offer the team your ideas, support, and critical feedback so we can achieve our Latinx thriving goals. The Latinx Thriving team encourages you to reach out to them at hsi.berkeley.edu, and I hope you will support them when they call upon you to help us achieve our Latinx thriving goals. Thank you for your commitment and support, and I look forward to the exciting work ahead.
Thank you so much, Chancellor Chris. And I want to restate what Chancellor Chris said, that we really encourage you to reach out to the Latinx Thriving team at hsi.berkeley.edu. You also heard the Chancellor state that Martha Chavez has joined these efforts at 40% of the time, along with an increase to Sylvia Marquez's time from 50% to 80%. And we are really grateful for that, the investment in time and people. Another update that we'd like to share with you is that we just joined Excelencia in Education. We've become a member of our Presidents for Latino Student Success Action Network. It includes over 130 presidents and chancellors who've committed to make colleges and universities learning environments where Latinx students thrive. We're going to be leveraging their collective expertise and resources, their articulated relationship with Excelencia to accelerate Latinx student success in higher education. As a member of this P4LSS, we can participate in Excelencia's Technical Assistance Institutes, as well as apply for the Seal of Excelencia, a national certification for institutions that strive to go beyond enrollment to intentionally serve Latinx students. We're also excited to announce that our steering committee has been formed. I want to say thank you to all the members of the Berkeley community who not only nominated themselves or others to serve on the inaugural Latinx Thriving Institution Initiative Steering Committee. The steering committee list is available on our HSI website. We want to thank the entire committee for their service to this institution in instrumental and actionable way. And a special thank you, as I started in the beginning, to Lisa Garcia Bedoya, our Vice Provost for Graduate Studies and Dean of Graduate Division, and Fabricio Mejia, Interim Chief of Staff and Assistant Vice Chancellor of Student Success and Equity Inclusion, for serving as the committee co-chairs. As you know, the success of any initiative, or really who we are and how we want to show up, are our lateral engagement efforts across campus and the community, if we really are going to be a place that centers community. We've engaged a number of campus and community partners in advancing this work, including the Latinx Research Center, the Graduate Division, as well as our colleagues externally like UCSD, hsi.berkeley.edu, and the U.S. Department of Education. With that, we're ready to move into the next portion of our agenda. We have two incredible panels for today. We've prepared questions for our panelists based partly on the feedback from the community and also from some of the questions submitted. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to my incredible colleague and amiga, Vice Provost for Graduate Studies and Dean of the Graduate Division, Lisa Garcia Bedoya, to kick us off. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Vice Chancellor Matos, and thanks to all of you for being here. I'm trying to think of, we were framed as the panel of the past. I'm Lisa Garcia Bedoya. I'm an alumna of Berkeley, also along with our panel, class of 1992, Go Bears. And I'm also responsible for graduate study on campus. And we are excited to partner as an integral part of this important initiative for campus. And today we're going to talk to three other esteemed alumni. So we have Monica Garcia, who's a board member in District 2 in the Los Angeles Unified School District. Maria Ledesma, who's an associate professor and is interim chair in the Department of Educational Leadership within the Lurie College of Education at San Jose State. And Ray Leon, who is mayor of the city of Huron. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. We know that you're very busy people, but we really wanted to talk to you about, as we think about what it means to be Latinx-Thriving and how we need to transform Berkeley, to make sure that's informed by the experiences of our alumni. And so that's our first question, which I'm going to ask you guys in the order that I just introduced you. Which is based on your experiences at Cal, what does Latinx-Thriving mean to you?
So, buenas tardes, Monica, class of 91. Super excited to be with all of you, and go Bears for wanting to be better situated to make an impact on the world. So I think about a thriving campus is one where that student is connected to self, to that broad mission of achievement, leadership, and service, and then to the campus and the community. I have to tell you, my experience at Cal was very much about discovering the strength of Monica and understanding the world she had lived in for 18 years. So I got to Cal and I learned that I was in a bad way, being a woman, being a daughter of immigrants, being a bilingual speaker. So all of the, I didn't know the world thought so poorly of me. And what gave me strength were the other amazing Latinx people I met there. What gave me strength was the staff and the professors that were interested in helping me see myself as the one who could make it. So my 0.045 GPA my first semester didn't tell the story. And I am ever grateful to the University of California for second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth chances. What I would say to Cal is meet your students where they are and help them build that bridge to their full potential. I think I'm a social worker, I'm a college advisor. A lot of the programs exist, they just need to be broadened. We should never think of a one-day anything. We should think about connection, 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 connection. And I think there is so much courage in our community, being willing to be vulnerable and talking about whatever challenges we face getting there. But I also think there needs to be a lot, I think as I've heard stories over the last 25 years, it's that personal belonging, connection, support that made a difference for so many first-generation college goers, right? And I think the other part of thriving is that every Latinx student is looked at as an asset to building that UC and that California, United States that we are, right? So really making it not about fitting into all of the boxes, but just unleashing that human potential that is inside of everyone. So I want to say my expectation would be every kid makes it, right? And every kid stays connected in service and in support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. Maria, what do you think?
Yeah, so I definitely want to echo many of the things that Monica just shared and say, for me in part, and by extension of what you just heard, what being a Latinx Thriving institution means to me as someone who, again, first gen, low SES background coming into the Cal campus, definitely being overwhelmed about what it meant to be at the university. But now having the benefit of looking back, right, and understanding, I really appreciate, again, the opportunity to have attended the University of California. And in part, it has shaped really my trajectory, for the rest of my career. At one point, I was student regent, and I really embrace the fact that, the power of the University of California and obviously Berkeley being its flagship as the first institution, founded, was in the power of serving the mission, right? The living up to the mission of serving the people of California. And if we look at what the demographics looks like, obviously that means paying attention to the Latinx population. But really, I want to underscore the fact that for me also, Latinx Thriving means that, of course, you have the compositional representation, the numbers, and you have critical mass across all of the stakeholders, students, both undergrad and grad, and you have presence in the faculty, a critical mass of Latinx in the faculty, staff, administration, et cetera. But it's more than that. It's more than just the compositional diversity. It also means, again, living up to the philosophy of being Latinx Thriving, making sure that the efforts between a Latinx philosophy are not siloed, that we don't have just the usual suspect departments that are considered to be, Latinx Thriving, but rather that this is a philosophy that is embraced from top down, bottom up across the campus. I think as I got to be on the campus and, many moons ago, class of 93, and had the chance to, take classes from, just a diverse array of just amazing scholars, to go from my class with Barbara Christian to my class with Margarita Melville, just amazing. And it didn't feel siloed, right? It felt welcoming. So I think that to me is part of the thriving. And again, underscoring the fact that these efforts should not be siloed, that being Latinx matters just as much in the hard sciences as it does in the humanities and the social sciences.
Thank you, Maria. So we've heard the importance of a sense of belonging, making sure that students have the resources to thrive, whatever it is that they may need, meeting them where they're at, making sure that the initiative is campus-wide and that it's not just about composition, but that we really are here to serve and represent the people of California. Ray, do you have anything else you want to add to that based on your experience, what you see as Latinx Thriving at Cal?
I think it definitely meant myself getting a hold of just my own person and building the best agent for change as possible. I became a catalyst in my community, started organizing when I was after my second year at Cal, came home one summer, started the health fair and kept on coming home and started a youth group, just started organizing. And to this day, now I'm the mayor of my city, which I never intended to be mayor, never wanted to be a elected official, but it just turned out that something needed to happen, and here I am. Over $50 million later of getting investments into my community for infrastructure, safety, and really making Huron the greenest city in the country. I think what Berkeley gave to me was that space and that energy, that environment to understand that I am someone that could create change since I was a kid, a student. But I think the biggest value that Berkeley had and has, the biggest asset is, of course, the students, but the programs that are able to expose the students to the rest of the community, being during my time there, also starting the first bilingual outfit on the west side of Berkeley, but just empowering the student to create change and empower community outside of the campus. So really thinking about how do we build those bridges, which I think are there, but how do we solidify them, expand them? I think a sister mentioned something similar, so that we could keep on creating that change. Because in the state of California, there's really there's a lot of space to bring about change, bring about equity in the Latino community. And I think Berkeley is the great launching pad to provide that.
Thank you, Ray. So what I'm hearing from you is being much more intentional about making sure that we're engaged with community and see that as part of not only our mission, but our production of knowledge, right? And making sure that people have the tools to be able to engage meaningfully in the places that they care about across the state.
And I could cite some groups that even I've been hosting here in Huron, particularly. While back in my days, it was MECHA, and Raster Recruitment and Retention Centers, where we would get the brother, I can't remember his name, and Max would get us some vans, and we would come to the Valley, and we'd hit numerous high schools, students. And that was, I think, the moment when I realized that I had the ability to convince youngsters to start thinking about higher education. After that, I became sort of a social justice minister for higher education, and would keep on organizing in that arena as well. But empowering those programs like Latinx and the environment, I've been able to get interns from that group, which I have been helping out with, and they've been helping me out in summers, providing them the exposure of what a farm worker community goes through, deals with, and the challenges, and also potential empowerment mechanisms to be able to advance our local society, right? Alternative breaks. Every year they come. Past 2 years they didn't because of the pandemic. But every year they come, they planted trees, we painted murals, and I always make sure that they engage students here. So we have a Huron Reading Heroes event where they read books to kids, and a bunch of kids come over with families, and then they introduce themselves. And most of them, usually there's a lot of Latinos in that group. Let's beef that up. Let's make it bigger. Let's send them to more communities where kids can become aware of UC Berkeley early. I didn't learn about UC Berkeley till my sophomore year in high school. Before that, it was just Fresno State and the local community college. Luckily I took chemistry, where I learned of Berkeley through the periodic table, the transuranium elements, and I became fired up to want to discover leonium, and so of course I didn't discover the element leonium, but I figured, okay, I guess I'm the element leonium, right, to create some change. And so no, I think there's a lot of good programs out there. During high school, the ATP program at the School of Education, where campesino kids from Huron would go to do ATP and get housed out there. 1 year I organized it and took them to Casa Joaquin Murrieta, and they were able to advance their studies, right? Make them more competitive. We have a lot of challenges in terms of quality education and access to AP and all that good stuff in a lot of our schools in the barrio, in different parts of California. So how could we empower students to be that catalyst of change for where they're from the barrio? But we got to make sure that we're bringing in the students from those barrios to be able to, break that chain,
Thank you, Ray. So that actually brings us to what advice you can provide us on what it is that you think we should be doing. And in particular, how can we connect with our alumni and the alumni experience as we engage in this initiative? So if I can go back to Monica.
So I love being a part of the cheerleading team for Cal, and I have told UC presidents, there are so many Latinos that have graduated from Cal, but we don't do a campaign of conversation, right? So I live in LA, there's Fight On everywhere. We need to celebrate the achievements locally. We also need to just invite people to tell their stories. So I loved hosting the CAA incoming president who graduated the year I was there, Alfonso Salazar, and we opened it up with students who had been invited to Cal. And there was questions, right? So I think what we can do is, one, tell the story of having made an impact and being part of the solution. Two, connect with our students. The class of 2040, high school graduating class of 2040, is born this year. I love hearing Ray say, before sophomore year, but it's this ongoing. Cal and the Latino community have a lot in common. The agenda of learning and leading is very much in solidarity with empowerment and self-determination. And then lastly, I think let's just break up the counties. Where are the Cal grads? And it has to be Cal Day, right? Whatever, if it's big game day, everybody gets together. We need to learn from the football success, right? To talk about reading and writing and that academic strength of interrupting poverty and really asking people to step forward and share. So I say invite people more than just on the fundraising side, but to talk about debunking myths of we cannot and we don't want to, and about lifting the success that we have had in really providing a pathway to economic wellness and overall well-being. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Monica. Maria, what should we be doing?
Yes, so I definitely want to underscore the communication. I think it's important, and it's important again across all constituencies and across the state, as Monica is stressing, that's tremendously important to be transparent in terms of the goals, in terms of the challenges, and what people can do to support, the efforts moving forward. Having had a chance to read the Chancellor's Task Force report on becoming a Hispanic serving institution, I think it's thorough, it's ambitious. So I would absolutely keep that as a guiding principle, and having it be something that reminds us to walk the talk. Unfortunately, a lot of reports have been produced that go on shelves, right, and that become relics. And this, as you said, as was said earlier with the land acknowledgement, should be a living document, because the ramifications of the Latinx population, it's only going to continue to grow. So how do we, move forward with this? How do we initiate change? And how do we use the hard work that the task force has created to, again, be those guiding principles? I also want to stress that at all times we need to be attentive to the question that again was asked in the report of what does it mean to become a Hispanic serving institution for non-Latinx communities, for non-Latinx individuals, especially those from historically minoritized backgrounds, Indigenous, Native American students, African American students. What does it mean to them, and what is the investment? Because what we do not want to do is, again, repeat those siloing. I think we want to remember at all times that a rising tide lifts all boats, and we want this to be, I think, a move in the direction that, again, is going to benefit everyone, especially since, I can't help always, citing the research, but research tells us that too often for many of these same populations, when they enter spaces like Cal, they feel like a guest in someone else's home. So how do we make this a home for not just the Latinx population, but for all of those BIPOC underrepresented groups who have very similar backgrounds and experiences, that it has to be something that it's going to be a payoff, not just for one, but for all.
Ray, what do you think? What should we be doing?
Well, I think just within the community of Latinx, I think you'll find people from every background, you know. It's a very diverse community, and the way I see it is this. I engage with a lot of clean energy corporations, with California, Cal EPA, and its boards, departments, and offices, and mainstream environmental organizations. And so nowadays, everybody wants to do environmental justice. But what I notice is that the leadership in all of these institutions and the representation does not really look like the demographic of the state. And I don't know if you guys know, but we're like 40%. Latinos are 40% of California. So we really need to take advantage of the ability to empower our community, because we are very humble and we are very supportive of all of our, you know, social siblings here in California. But we got to make sure that our communities are taken care of as well. You know, Huron is 98.7% Latino. We are, as far as data goes, so at this point, the brownest city in the country. You know, but we're very diverse. We have at least 12 languages spoken. Over 10 of them are Native American, Mesoamerican, indigenous languages. We are very diverse, but we got to make sure that the equity exists in the state of California for our community as well. You know, it's not reflected in the demographics of all the institutions, not even the local institutions here in my community of the community college district, the school district, and others. So we need to empower as many of our young Latinos, Latinas, Latinx as possible, because there's spaces that they should be taking up. There's spaces that they should be, where they should be growing their leadership. And that's, I think, should be one of our foci.
Can I add one? I would be remiss if I just didn't say we need to invest so that the financial burden on our students doesn't become the focus of their decisions to go to school. And I know there's a lot of work being done here, but it is the most talked about. That's the biggest decision that kids who are going to college today are trying to figure out. So whether it's the transfer warm handoff or the high school senior warm handoff, we need to make it easier to pay for college at Cal, and housing and living expenses.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica. We have about 5 minutes left. And so I want to build on that and ask and it sounds like you're saying, how would being a Latinx-Thriving institution transform the Berkeley experience? One way of doing that would be to make sure that our students graduate with no debt, which would be wonderful, right? What else do you think, Monica, would, if we were to become Latinx-Thriving, how would that change the Berkeley experience?
So, you know, I was spoiled in Chicano studies by people who just gave way more than a job description ever calls on. And so I would say that encouraging faculty to be brilliant and of service to the aspiring professor or graduate or whatever, but that the sharing of the developmental process on campus will just, I think what it will do is create the bigger us in the winning circle, right? So we need to encourage the humanity side of achievement and excellence. And we need to encourage the mentorship of that incoming class over and over, and the connection, again, with public schools and the community. It can be seamless, it is powerful, and the purpose, right? To make sure that that purpose of challenging and leading and creating solutions. If everybody works on homelessness, guess what? Big win for all. So we have to, I think Berkeley has to see itself as the leader in the country and the planet, and the people who go there that diversity of experience and thought can only lead to better. So more sharing.
Thank you, Monica. Maria?
Yes, so there's a lot of ways to answer this question of how being a Latinx-Thriving institution would transform Berkeley, the Berkeley experience, and then carry over to the alumni experience. I think tangibly, becoming a thriving institution would definitely equip students with, the studies, the experience, the preparation that, Monica was alluding to help them not just persist to graduation, but hopefully beyond, and to recall their Cal experiences with fondness. I think that, if we are truthful, and I've had many of these conversations with other higher ed colleagues, too often, when we reflect back on our undergraduate experiences, it may be that, there are some sour, experiences as well. So how do we, again, cultivate a nurturing environment that is going to provide holistic, well-rounded students and experiences? I think part of what we do is again, recognize that now, currently, as well as in the past, you have a lot of students who are carrying and doing the work of the university, and sometimes unacknowledged, right? Students who take on the burden of doing not just paid outreach, but they do outreach because they need that connection with the community. And that outreach in turn helps them persist and, maintain on their educational journey. But they're doing that on top of, trying to study, on top of working and contributing to a household income, either their own and others. So how do we recognize, again, those shortfalls to support students, not just academically, but in totality? I definitely acknowledge what Ray was saying earlier, that there's a multitude of experiences. We have students who are, from Latinx backgrounds, coming from not just low SES, experiences. They are well off financially. And then you have some that are, on our campuses as undocumented and in need of extra supports, right? So there is a multitude of ways that we need to investigate how to address all of these needs. And I think in turn, providing as much as possible. Obviously, in an ideal world, budget wouldn't be an issue. You would address all these needs. But as much as you invest in the student, I think, down the road, when you come asking them for their contribution, they'll invest back in you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for naming that. And Ray, you've got the last minute. What do you want to share?
So let me just begin by saying California is the 5th strongest economy on the planet. And I can't believe that us Californios still have to pay to go to a University of California that we're already paying taxes for, just to begin. I think there's just too much work. In regards to the campus, to be a Latinx thriving institution, a lot of us, what I've noticed is that I got mentees that are going to UC Berkeley and other institutions of education, and they're first generation still. I've talked to elders that they were first generation. I was first generation. We need that space, that socio-culturally safe space for students to be able to go, be embraced, feel at home, and have tias, UC tias and UC padrinos like Lupe Gallegos was to me when I was there, and really fired me up in terms of health fairs, in terms of doing a lot of the work that I've done. A lot of the stuff that really my community has benefited greatly from, and not just in my city, but in the region. But there's a lot of work, and we got to really prepare the next generation of the leaders, and in every field, science and technology included, because I'm telling you, the demographics of California are not reflected in the demographics of corporations, of government, and of philanthropy and nonprofits. That needs to change. And the only way it's going to change is through, I think, one of the elements for that change is this, here right now, all of us, right? And this University of Berkeley, go Bears, right? Being an HSI, well, let's be intentional about what that means. And it's got to be about empowering our communities, empowering a California that is equitable and that recognizes the value of Latino lives as well, and campesino lives, the essential workers that finally get called essential during a pandemic because we're working in the fields during the smoky days and the air is terrible, but there's our gente. We sacrifice too much to get too little, and we got to change it. Us who are the privileged ones to try to make this change, I think HSI would be great, but let's make it thrive, and not just on campus, but in our communities in California.
Thank you so much, Ray. That's the perfect note to end on. I so appreciate all the work all of you do. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And thank you for reminding us that this is a multifaceted, multi-layered effort that has to be integrated with the well-being of the Latinx community statewide. So thanks to you all. And now I will turn it over to Fabricio Mejia, who will MC our student panel.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to our alumni panel. I have the pleasure of talking to a panel of our current students, 2 graduate students and an undergraduate student, that are going to tell us about what they're going through and how they see it from that perspective. And so with that, I'm going to, as I turn it over to you as a panelist, please introduce yourself when you start. We're going to start off with Savannah, who's an undergraduate. Savannah, what does thriving mean to you?
Yeah, hello. My name is Savannah. As the screen indicated, I'm a public policy minor and political science major. I'm a 4th year, so I'm graduating in a little under a month. But I think when I think about what it means to be Latinx thriving, I think about like the feelings that are associated with like being on campus. And I think back on I'm a 4th year now. So when I was a 1st year, I felt like obviously really out of place. And I felt like I couldn't really see myself on campus. I couldn't really see myself in my professors, in my peers. And it really took like searching on my part for mentors, femtors, organizations, spaces where I could find people that looked like me and understood me. And I think being a Latinx thriving institution or a space or a school, university, community means that you change that feeling for a student. So I think like when you step on campus, I think those feelings of uncomfortableness and weariness and being nervous are very, they're very common. But I think if you're a Latinx thriving university, your goal should be that by the time you're a 4th year, you feel that you see yourself on campus. You feel that you feel confident in the experiences that you've had. And the reason that I know that we're not there yet is because I'm still not there for myself. I still don't feel that I look around and I see professors who look like me. I mean, I'm a 4th year, and as a 4th year now, in my 2nd semester of my 4th year, I've had one professor in the entire political science department who is a Latino. And so I think reflecting on that experience really for me solidifies that in order to be thriving, we need to really, really support our students when it comes to their feeling of belonging, whether that starts with, staff and faculty. How are we making sure that we're being intentional about how we recruit and hire staff and faculty? Because at the end of the day, you're going to have the student sitting in that class, listening to a professor or an instructor, and then trying to go to their office hours. And it's really hard to do all of those things that they tell us to do at college, like network and go to office hours, when we feel that we're talking to people who don't understand us. When that comes to like space, how are you stepping onto campus, and how are you looking around and seeing spaces and communities that actually reflect where you come from? And so that means that if we're going to have a resource center or a space that is dedicated to being Latinx thriving, how visible is that space, right? How hard is it to reach that space? How funded is that space? And then finally, like once you actually get through it all, right? Once you've fought your battles, and once you accomplish what you need to accomplish to get through a school like UC Berkeley, what does the celebration look like? And so for me, thriving means that when you get to that celebratory stage, that is a funded, worry-free celebration, right? And so how are we funding a Latinx graduation? How are we ensuring that students can afford to bring their parents out and celebrate with them, or their family members and their loved ones? How are we ensuring that students don't have to pay for a place to graduate? And so when we think about those things, I think about them in stages for thriving. And I think about the stages of like a student on campus. And so I think it just comes down to a sense of belonging. And once they do find that sense of belonging, to make sure that we're, as a university, backing that up with funding and administrative support.
Thank you, Savannah. So one of the things I heard you say is that the sense that the place represents you in the various identities that you carry, that the place normalizes your experience, that the place feels like it respects you and responds to you, and makes policy and practice and decisions around what that means and what that looks like. Thank you. So Miguel, same question for you. When I ask you what does thriving mean to you, what comes up for you?
Hi everyone, my name is Miguel. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a second year PhD student in the English department. Thriving means to me that all members of the community, Latinx and non-Latinx, are considered in terms of their diverse positionalities as they relate to being able to achieve their desired outcomes. And this includes both educational outcomes, professional outcomes, but also quality of life outcomes. And by diverse positionalities, I mean, for example, considering graduate students as people who are teachers, students, researchers, sometimes student parents, as well as people with mental health and community needs. And becoming a Latinx thriving institution as it relates to the graduate student specifically would keep in mind that graduate students play a crucial role in the Berkeley educational ecosystem. We might be like 25% of the student body, but this means that we have like an outsized teaching obligation relative to some of our peers at other institutions. So it would account for that. It would also account for issues such as departmental climate, because that tends to be more relevant to graduate students' lives rather than like campus climate as a whole, though campus climate would also be important because I and other students also like to show up for our undergraduates. But it would mean being intentional about creating a department climate where graduate students can thrive. And it would mean also like supporting graduate students from underrepresented backgrounds, which involves seeing the faculty to student ratio as partially a pipeline problem. And this would have to start at the undergraduate level, beginning, I think, from actually probably like pre-enrollment to making sure that people are able to thrive at Cal, so that whatever educational outcomes they desire are actually outcomes that are available to them, as opposed to things that are foreclosed due to feeling excluded from the community or it's not a home. And finally, I think it would involve encouraging graduate students to be intentional pedagogues so that they're able to offer the kind of mentorship that could help them contribute to the community as good community citizens, but also enabling faculty members to be effective pedagogues and mentors and mentors and mentors that would enable them to also support graduate student life and foster a climate where students of all positionalities and identities can thrive.
Thank you, Miguel. Among the many things you raised, one of the things I heard you say was making sure that we're intentionally giving departments the resources, support, and the accountability to make sure that culturally they're doing the shifts that need to happen to meet our students where they're at, to have them feel a sense of belonging, and to address things that probably have been needed to be addressed for a long time. Cynthia, what about you? What does becoming Latinx Thriving mean to you?
Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a PhD candidate in the school psychology program, which is housed in the Graduate School of Education. Thriving to me means learning and growing in a safe and supportive environment. And that includes having the resources necessary to learn and to grow in that environment. So I know Monica earlier mentioned how, well, I think everyone in the last panel mentioned like funding and how important that is. There is so much inequity across Berkeley and different departments regarding funding, specifically how, I mean, and that impacts both undergraduates and graduate students, but there's different levels of funding for particular programs. And then, you know, there's also the different levels of privilege from all these different students. And so you have some students who are first generation like myself and come from low income backgrounds like myself, and, you know, have to fill various roles and jobs in order to get through programs, while, you know, peers aren't worried about that because they have that funding there. And so I think having the resources, it allows you this freedom to just go to school and learn what you want to learn and prioritize, like, this is what I want to do. These are the classes I want to take. Like, there's just this freedom there. And I think so many Latinx students don't have that coming into Berkeley because they're managing you know, issues of racism and inequity at school. They're managing issues of inequity in funding and you know, personal issues as well, and needs of their own family and you know, community and cultural kind of practices that the institution doesn't really cater to. I mean, like, how many graduation tickets do we receive? Like, is that that might be enough for some families, but that's not enough for a lot of Latinx families. So things like that, where at times the different various cultures are not considered by the institution. And I think when those things happen, then thriving can occur. I also think that thriving means being in a good place mentally and emotionally. So like overall wellness is so important. I think students at UC Berkeley in general are brilliant, but often push themselves so hard to the point where like mental health gets placed on the back burner, and there's nothing they can do about that because assignments need to be turned in. And basic needs as well, like making sure students have enough to eat and a place to live that is affordable. I think particularly at Berkeley, that is a huge issue. And I do have a lot to say also about faculty and how they treat students, but I think I'll save that to the next question. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. One of the things I heard you say was that thriving should not just be around go burnout culture, but that it needs to center wellness as part of what it should be for the entire community and for us as students. So there's a difference between being challenged and being hazed in an experience, and I think many of our students express the latter, and we need to work on that. So thank you all. So I'm going to transition to the next question, and I'll go back to Savannah. Do you think becoming a thriving institution impacts the experience for students and the community? I assume the answer is yes. So maybe you could focus on how.
Yeah, I think Cynthia kind of touched on this, and I believe some of the alum did too. I think one of the biggest kind of like actions behind support for a thriving institution is funding. And like Cynthia was mentioning, there is this burnout culture with a lot of underrepresented students because we don't feel that we have to have multiple jobs. We have to also take on like an advocacy role in order for ourselves to create a sense of community. We have to be like super ultra involved just in order for ourselves to exist on campus. And there's a few layers to that. And I think one of them is that when the university thinks about becoming a Latinx thriving or a Hispanic serving institution or all of these different things, I think there's a common, I don't know if it's a misconception, but I think it's a belief that's talked about a lot, is that we have to create new programs, we have to create new systems, we have to be unique, and we have to think outside the box. And I think to an extent that's true, but I think the other side of it is that it's already being done. It's being done by so many different organizations and spaces and programs on campus who do this work, and they face funding issues. And so you have students working for free. You have departments who have to make tough decisions, such as how many students can Bridges and RRCs bring for their senior weekend because of how, funding. The CLSD, having students who are doing like really, really, really good work for the Latinx community, but have to do it for units instead of for money because there's not enough funding for it. Or, having to turn away students who want to cross the stage after they're graduating, but because we only have so much money that we can pay for a stadium or for the Greek, students are turned away. And so all of these things we think about are already existing, they're already being done, work is already being done. So how can we elevate and support through funding? And I think that when the university prioritizes that and they view student success as their own, when they view the most undervalued student at UC Berkeley's success as the success of the entire university, at that point, we become thriving. We are able to thrive. And so I think that is something that I want to highlight for how it changes, one student's or the individual's experience, is that we are then paid for the work we do. I can't tell you the amount of work that I've done for free, that I'm doing for free, the amount of jobs that I've held that I hesitate to put on my resume as jobs because I don't get paid to do them. And so I know that's not a unique experience at Cal for students, especially Latinx students. And so I think about how it changes the way that we see the university viewing us or how we feel valued. And when we feel that we are a part of an institution that values us, we want to give to the university. We want to graduate and give money back. We want to create programs. We want to give more to the university. But I think only until you see that, action being behind the words and you see the appreciation for the work that we already do, only at that point will our experience, be changed and be altered. So.
Thank you, Savannah. There were so many quotable things in what you just said, so I appreciate that. One of the things I heard you talk about is making sure that we're funding the programs we know already work and that we're scaling that up as we're thinking about that we're not distracted by the shiny and the new, but if something works, fund it and scale it up. Cynthia, same question for you. How would becoming a Latinx-Thriving institution impact the student experience from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that everything the institution does is going to directly impact students. So when there are changes made and when policies are implemented or not implemented, it's directly impacting us and the community. So for my program, we work in the community quite a bit, unpaid labor to start. But, we're often matched as school psychologists in training with the higher funded schools in the Bay Area because they are seen as like better school programs. When there are so many schools in the Bay Area, in Berkeley and Oakland, that need support, and if they are taking, these graduate students from Berkeley who can provide mental health support to the students, why are we not matching them with those particular schools that can provide services to them? So things like that. And there's almost like this disdain for creating these community partnerships because the institution is so set in its ways that when students offer different ideas, it's hard for the programs and the institutions to understand like why this is important for the students and to make those changes. So I think when programs are kind of set, it's really hard to get them out of it. And that's been my personal experience. I'll also say, when Latinx and diverse student needs are not considered, it shows so much in courses, in programs in general, where, I've been told in a class because I wanted to learn more about diverse student groups and their needs that I'm being an activist and not a mental health professional, right? These have been told to me at Berkeley. And so, or these things have been told to me at Berkeley. I've been the only person of color in a space so many times and have really been kind of labeled as like the angry brown girl who always stirs up problems, right? And so I think that there's so much to say about programs that have been around for so long, those who run the programs that have been in these positions for so long, and the faculty that they hire in these programs and the ideals that they have. Because when those things are not shaken up, or those things are not kind of evaluated regularly, these things can happen where students like myself who want to make changes get pushback and pushback to the point where they're like, I'm exhausted, I can't do this anymore. And then the next year someone can address this problem. And so, yeah, I think that that is one of the biggest issues. It doesn't come from, obviously it's not on the students to make these changes, it's on the institution, it's on those in power to really understand how students are feeling and what their needs are in order to address the issues and to take that labor off of students. Because as much as, advocacy is so important, as, the other two panelists have said and myself has said, we're doing so much work already. We are exhausted. It is hard to be a student of color at Berkeley, and to have to advocate for ourselves all the time on top of that is really hard. And so those in power should definitely be doing the work, and there should always be an effort to ensure that the graduate students and the undergraduate students who are graduating from the institution have the knowledge to provide like equitable support to this community when they're out there. So they have the training and feel comfortable working with diverse groups. That is not always prioritized at UC Berkeley programs. And I think that that's something that's really important that should be considered.
Thank you, Cynthia. One of the things I heard you say is the frustration and exhaustion around trying to transform structures that are entrenched, and that sometimes they look at a minor change as progress, and our students push us to say that's not enough. It's not fast enough, and it's not enough, and so I thank you for that. So Miguel, in the last 3 or so minutes that we have, I'm going to pose to you another question. How do you see racial justice connected to becoming a Latinx-Thriving institution? And I'll say as a way of opening to that one of the things that we've been doing is having this conversation about becoming an anti-racist campus. And our Vice Chancellor Matos has said, you can't think about those things separate. Those things need to be connected. You're not Latinx Thriving unless you're unless your campus is anti-racist. So if you could talk a little bit about that, Miguel.
Yes. So I guess the first place to start would be like building off of what Ray and Maria were pointing out in the earlier panel, which is that the Latinx community is internally diverse to begin with. We have folks of various social economic statuses. We have folks who are of different immigration generations. We have folks of different immigration statuses, such as undocumented or legal citizen or green card holder. We have folks of different neurotypes, different disability statuses, different sexual orientations, different gender identities, different gender expressions, and so on and so forth. So I think that given the intersectionality that's already evinced by the Latinx community, there is no way to solve the fundamental structural issues plaguing it, such as access to basic resources, access to mentorship that reflects demographically the composition of the community, that wouldn't also end up addressing needs for other communities as well. For example, I wouldn't see a way of serving queer Latinx students, such as myself, that wouldn't also be helpful for serving the queer community as a whole. Similarly, I wouldn't see a way of serving neurodivergent Latinx students, such as myself, that also wouldn't involve putting in the resources in place to serve neurodivergent students on this campus as a whole. So I see the intersectionality of the Latinx community as a resource. At the same time, I think it's important to keep in mind that we could also treat the Latinx Thriving, the move to become a Latinx Thriving institution as a model for what sorts of specific needs communities are facing. For example, even though a fundamental structural issue on this campus is that more mental health resources are needed, different communities have culturally relevant mental health needs. And so we would probably need to have mental health resources that address the divergencies in those needs among different communities, but that also attends to issues at the intersections of those communities. So I think the short of it is that in order for us to become a Latinx-Thriving institution, we need to see that as being one and the same mission as becoming an anti-racist institution, and also becoming an institution that is queer affirming, that is access-oriented, and that is able to support its students regardless of the identity categories that they happen to fall under, as well as the different positionalities that they happen to hold.
Well, Savannah, Cynthia, Miguel, thank you so much for your wisdom, and thank you for not holding back. We are enlightened by our time with you, so I appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chancellor Matos for the next portion.
Thank you so much, Fab, and thank you to our students and alumni. I'm so inspired by you, but also just the generosity of sharing your story, your journeys, and your support and being in this with us. I know Dr. Gina Garcia wasn't on the call initially when I provided the acknowledgement, but she since has joined us, and I wanted to thank her also on the national research she's doing on this work, and just helping us center that and those different places. So we got a chance, earlier I said past, present, and future. I didn't mean to make the alumni kind of sound like that, but really it's thank you for letting us look back onto your Cal days. There is no past to that. You're still alumni with us, but then we were able to explore the current day experience with our students, and really appreciate that. I believe, Savannah, if you don't recall, this topic came up from one of my conversations with you. So thank you for helping shape this. And Miguel, also with you. So hopefully you saw that we responded to your call to action and inviting us in. I now have the distinct honor to inviting in the voices and the stories of our steering committee co-chairs, people who I admire, have the pleasure of not only working with, but really being engaged in this work together. And so this is looking into the future. And the magic crystal ball, which we have, or mirando hacia el futuro. So Lisa, Fab, hello. If we were in person together, I could imagine some cafecito. It's a little late for me, so just like pretend you're enjoying whatever it is you'd like at this time, and we're sitting on whatever makes you comfortable. But one of the things I often talk about is affirming people's humanity and sharing beyond the bio, right? And beyond all of you. So as we're centering storytelling in our collective stories, could you tell us a little bit of yourselves beyond the bio, and also tie in a little bit of what Latinx Thriving means to you? If you all have been paying attention, that's been the introductory question we've asked each one of our panelists to thread the story and weave it together of our collective Latinx Thriving experience. So Lisa, take it away.
Thank you so much, Vanya. So just to let folks know a little bit about me, my parents are Cuban refugees. I grew up in Southern California. I came to Cal because it was far enough that I knew my parents wouldn't come visit me. They wouldn't stop by unexpectedly, but I'm very grateful to this institution because I would never have imagined or even been able to consider an academic career had it not been for Berkeley. And so for me, I've understood that I stand on the shoulders of giants, and that there are many people from my community who aren't present on this campus and who aren't able to engage in the amazing education that we provide people, and who therefore whose voices we're not hearing. And so I have dedicated my career to honoring those folks whose shoulders we stand on, and to opening the doors more widely behind me to make sure that the next generation has a better experience than I did. And so for me, Latinx Thriving means that, and I guess I need to name that Berkeley sits on top of a profoundly inequitable K-12 system, which really hurts our Latinx students. And so to acknowledge that we need to fix that, but that's a little bit outside of our scope. But assuming that we get folks to be able to come here, that students can actually really reach their full academic potential without having to feel like they have to have those fights that Cynthia was bringing up, without feeling like they have to constantly defend their intellect, their knowledge, their well-being, in order to be able to be part of this institution. So I feel like Diversity 1.0 was adding brown and Black folks to campus, like me. I'm a child of the 80s and 90s at Cal. Now it's really about transforming the institution to value and honor and allow those students to thrive. And I think that's a really profound institutional transformation that has to include all the things that Mia just talked about in terms of making sure that every aspect of minoritization is really considered and their intersections. So that's what it means to me.
Thank you, my fellow Caribeña. And so really appreciate that. And I think I too went as far as I could go, and then realized I really liked my mom showing up on campus with my siblings. So it was one of those things where I really appreciate it. Fab, we get to work together every day. You see sort of me a lot. And so teach me something. Tell me a little bit, or teach us all about you and Beyond the Bio and what Latinx Thriving means to you.
Yeah, so what comes up for me is my parents. My mom was Bolivian, my dad Mexicano, and my dad was a farm worker, and my mom ended up becoming a major organizer in the union for Justice for Janitors. It was local hsi 22, and a fierce woman at a time in the union where it was very white male dominated. And so I watched her lead through influence and not worry about credit. So I learned a lot by watching how to lead through influence, and I think that's something that I carry to this day. And then the second thing I'll share was, is I came to Berkeley as well, and I worked a lot. Not just in my campus positions as an EOP peer counselor, but also forklifting at a meatpacking company, cleaning the daycare building. So this notion of not having really the time to just be a student, because there's this pressure to make sure that our parents weren't, that our families, that our systems that we come from weren't lacking, and I think it's something that, of course, many of our students face, that we don't grapple with. That it's not just what they have here; it's what they left behind, and that pressure to achieve is a heavy burden that many take it willingly, but just because it doesn't look heavy doesn't mean it's not. And so I really think about that from our students. So in terms of Latinx Thriving, I'll say simply, I've been thinking a lot about how we shift the paradigm or the way we think about this notion of college ready. How do we make college students college ready, and this deficit framework that implies. But what does it look like to flip it and say, how do we make our institutions student ready? And what is our responsibility to think about that from an intersectional perspective? That if it doesn't work for some, the solution's not good enough, and we need to keep iterating until we get to something that is beyond what I've heard administrators say many years ago. Well, if it's good enough for 80%, that's about as good as it gets, and to me, that's not good enough.
Well, Fab, you delivered. You did teach me something. I'll share with you later what that was, but I think it really spoke to my core, right? And as you were talking about your family and the organizing and your story, I really started to tear up a little bit. So thank you. Lisa, you talked about ancestors, our ancestros, right? And kind of standing on the shoulders of that. I think about sort of the cycle in histories, right? And the hundreds of years that Berkeley has been, and the communities and how we come there. So where do you go from here, right? The sense of urgencies now, it also becomes sort of deeply personal for some of us. And when we think about who we carry with us, I always say one day you're going to be somebody's ancestor too, and we want them to be proud. So where do we go?
In terms of the initiative, or you're muted.
Yeah, where do we go from here in terms of the initiative? Correct.
Well, I think the first thing we have to acknowledge, I also want to thank all the people who agreed to be on the steering committee and all the people who are here on this call today. I think it really speaks to the collective energy and excitement and hope. And I want to just also honor that hope is actually really hard, especially if you've been in the institution for a long time and it's let you down, possibly repeatedly. It's difficult to then really believe that things can change. And so I think it's really harnessing and leveraging all of this amazing energy that we have to work together to figure out how to do this. And I think to lift up, I think Fab, the orientation is exactly the right one, but no one's done this, right? So it's not like we have a model to then say, this is exactly what we have to do at Berkeley. So I think it's about starting, having a conversation, digging in, figuring out what does success look like. We've talked about that a lot today, but as we think about the steering committee's work and we think about implementing the recommendations of the task force, what would success look like, and what do we have to do in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years to achieve that? And how do we keep track? To Fab's point, how do we iterate and how do we keep track and try to do it better? But I think we have to give ourselves permission to fail. I think we have to give ourselves permission to be bold and to be experimental and to try some things, because no one's ever done this, and we need to figure it out. And as long as I think we're centered in that primary humanity of our students and our need to serve them in all of their facets, hopefully we can get it right, but we need the entire community to make that happen.
You're so right. We're charting new course in so many ways, right? I really sort of think about no one's ever done this. So there's lots of excitement and possibilities of doing that. But to the earlier point of like, how do we lift up what's really working, what has been done, right? And come together newly. Fab, I'm gonna throw it over to you before I mute myself in terms of ¿a dónde vamos aquí? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I agree with Lisa. That part of what I think Lisa and I are charged to do is really think about the powerful group that we've assembled in the steering committee, and how do we unleash them? How do we get them rolling and thinking and beginning to push other leaders very strategically, but in a way that balances momentum and transformation, right? Because we do need to see the wins, and what I don't want us to do is focus on the short term and say we're going to just make sure we have constant wins and forget about the things that are going to take a little while longer. So it's that balance of it that I think is what's going to be an interesting challenge, but one that I think both Lisa and I we signed up for, so we have no choice, right?
And we thank you for signing up. As you all have talking and all the panelists were talking, I really was wanting to get sort of community thoughts, reflections, feedback. If you're someone who, I get great ideas at 4 a.m., right? And I tend to have a journal where I write them, but please send them in to us, hsi.berkeley.edu. I know we only have a couple minutes, but I wanted to also kind of share and say that, ask the question of you all. You are now steering committee co-chairs, right? And so what are the institutional changes that need to happen in place? Sorry, let me do that over. What are the institutional changes that need to be in place for this to happen? And what would you prioritize first? So maybe I'll start with Fab on this one.
Yeah, one of the things that I'll say is that, and we had this conversation maybe a few months back, is that we're not going to fundraise our way out of towards becoming Latinx Thriving. Fundraising is a super important part of it, but it's that lateral engagement that Dania, you've been talking about. Is what's the role of deans and chairs, cabinet members, and of course our fundraisers, and making sure that as we think through the structures that we need to put in place, that all of that's on the table. Because if we're relying on annual year-to-year fundraising, then structures may be stood up, but 2 or 3 years later they will not exist, and that's not good enough.
Thank you, Lisa.
What I'll add is, and this is going to be the difficult part, is I think we actually have to change how Berkeley does business. Right now, the way that we operate is very siloed, that everyone kind of has their area. And the problem is for this initiative, I think it was Maria Ledesma who was talking about how it has to touch every part of campus. It has to touch the academic side of the house. It has to touch every part of the administrative side of the house. It has to be that, I'm responsible for graduate students. The vice provost for undergraduate education is responsible for undergraduates, both of us have to see this as central to our roles to serve our constituency in order to really transform the institution. And so that lateral engagement, that horizontal connection, that connectivity and connective tissue across different leaders, subject matter areas, right? All of that. And that people have to feel like this is part of their work, that it's not this sort of tangential thing that's off on the side. And that's going to be really hard because Berkeley is an incredibly large place, very complicated, radically decentralized, and we take bureaucracy, to the next level, right? So really, in terms of thinking holistically about how to serve students does require some pretty significant changes in how we do our work and how we allot budgets and all these kinds of things. And so I think that's where we have to get to in terms of the first priority. For me, it's defining for the steering committee to sit down and really think about what does success look like? And how will we, then you have to come up with a work plan for what are the steps that need to happen to get us there. But first, I think we all need to be on the same page because I think many of us will define it differently. We have to decide what our collective vision is for now, appreciating that that will change and iterate and grow over time.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Fab. I shared that you both inspired me, and now that's grown a little more. So thank you for, I can't wait to see what we're going to do together with the steering committee as well. And I thank you all for being here. We're going to shift to closing. Can you believe it's over? Oh my gosh, 90 minutes went so fast. And here we thought it was going to be long, but thank you for being with us and being a part of the community. We wanted to briefly share next steps, but also thank everyone. One of the intents of today was also to uplift the various voices and stories in our community and the folks engaged with this work so far, which includes so many of you. So we want your stories. We want your feedback. We want your collective wisdom and really approaching it in this way intentionally. Our próximos pasos, next steps. The steering committee meetings and updates are coming soon, as we shared in our campus communication. We have formed that community. It's on the website. The next committee we're going to be forming is the External Advisory Committee, and that nomination process is going to be coming out, as well as honoring our continual commitment for our once a semester town halls to really co-create this with you all in the community. Your topics, feedback, all of those are going to be welcome. And then we will continue to shape the programming of this based upon that. Also, as I promised, we will provide sort of answers or responses to the questions that were submitted on our website and do that to be responsive. With that, I wanted to, it looks like we do have a date. We can save the date. I didn't even know we had a date for the Fall Town Hall. How exciting. For those that plan ahead and are booked into 2024 like me, save that date. And I think we were intentional about mapping out that date along with something else. And so I see Sylvia there. Sylvia, you like to be behind the scenes, but I'd like to, if you want to come off mic or say anything, and Martha as well, just thank you. We could have fun while we're doing really important intentional work.
Yeah, thank you for a few moments. Hi, everyone. We did plan the fall town hall. We're looking at the same time frame, 4:30 to 6. And I just want to thank folks that joined us today. Many of you have reached out and said, how can I support these efforts? And so we will be calling on you, I promise you. So thank you for that. And the feedback loop as well. We welcome your feedback, and I'm going to drop that into the chat. Thank you.
With that, thank you for gifting us the gift of your time. I know we've gone into the evening time. Thank you. This is heart work, and our heart is full knowing that there's so many people invested in this together. So, si se puede, si podemos. Yes, we can, and yes, we will. Have a good evening, everyone.
Si se pueden, go Bears.
I love that.
Adios.